What's going on, everyone? Tanner Poppitt here at Madrost and Poppitt's Corner. And if you are looking for the best in physical media, make sure to go check out Bionic Records in Cypress, California. They have been in operation since 1988 and offer a wide variety of musical styles, whether it be punk, jazz, metal, rock, anything your heart desires. Go check out Bionic Records in Cypress, California. Go hit up Mike. Heck, tell him I sent you. Bionic Records, Cypress, California. What's going on, everyone? Welcome, episode 113 of Poppitt's Corner, and I am super excited to get the opportunity to talk to this gentleman in question. And of course, I'm talking about the great Juan Ricardo of Wretch, Dark Arena, tons of other killer bands, which I'm super excited to get into. So, Juan, thanks so much again for coming on and hanging. I really appreciate it.
It's great to be here. And yeah, I know I sing for a lot of bands. You could have just kept going, listing off names. It would have been like by random and it'd probably been right, so.
Well, then the interview would have been over and then I would have been bummed.
That's true. That's true. The entire time just would have been like listing them off. But
how you been, man?
I've been great. Just really busy, as you can imagine. But that's the way I like it. And so I feel fantastic. Just came back from doing some shows and right back into the studio working on stuff. So
Absolutely.
And people wonder how I do it because because people are like, wow, who Juan Ricardo, Dark Arena, of Wretch, of Sunless Sky, Blind Cross, Attacks, the Vith Ricardo project. They're like, how do you do this all? And a lot of it has to do is it's the budgeting of time, and a lot of people don't have that, I guess, that idea of how do you maximize your time. If you think the album, like the Dark Green album, Worlds of Horror, that's coming out here August 27th, Still Records. I mean, that album the recording of the album began in 2018.
Sure, which we'll get to. I don't want to spoil it just yet. It's all a timeline. So,
right.
How I like to get started on here is I'm going to literally just go through your entire career and hopefully tell some stories and basically.
Well, that is the whole show then.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're gonna take the show. Go ahead now.
Absolutely.
No, keep going. Go on.
I'm just kind of curious, for you, when was kind of your first kind of recollection of just kind of hearing music, and what was the band that you had initially heard?
Wow. I actually started singing really young. Probably I was about 10 years old. And I loved different bands. It's well, I gotta age myself and tell you this. You're talking the 70s, so 60s, late 60s, early 70s. So I was listening at that age. It's just rock music on the radio, that kind of thing. And really, I kind of like was listening to just typical stuff. I wasn't really listening to, like, you would think, oh wow, Juan Ricardo metal, listening to metal. You know what I mean? I didn't get into metal until I was a teenager. So when I started at 10 years old singing, I was just listening to rock music on the radio, and by chance, my mom was playing, had friends that were in this Spanish band, and they're like, oh, we need a drummer. And I was like messing around with drums and singing, and I was only like 10 years old, and they were like, why don't you come down and play drums? And I walked in and said, oh, this is a Nino, this is a little kid. Oh, he could really play. So I sat down and started playing. Oh, he could really play. And they had these two girls that were singing, and they were god awful. They were no, honest, they were just like, wow, awful. And so after a few minutes of listening to them try to do this melodies, I started to hum along, and I said, I could probably do that melody. And they were like, while I was playing the drums, I could probably sing that melody. So I started to sing the melody, and they're like, oh my God, this kid sings like an angel. And so they sort of switched places. And so basically I started to play drums and to sing, and that's initially my first um experience with music. It wasn't until I got all the way, I was a drummer that would just fill in and sing. Like I would start doing music sessions, and you know, I just started being like doing harmony vocals on other people's music recordings. That's what I started doing. And it wasn't until I got to it's going to be like a true story, but I got to college and I said to myself, you know, I really should consider seriously studying singing. So when I went to college, I went to college for music and actually started as an opera singer, studying classical music, studied opera.
Interesting. So let's go all the way back to like I guess 10 or when you were first just kind of discovering music. Did your parents did they play a lot of it around the house? Was it very musical?
No, it was the opposite. I was the oddball. I was the, you know, the Puerto Rican kid listening to rock music, listening to AC/DC and, you know, Judas Priest when they first came out, the Rock-a-Rolla and the Sad Wings of Destiny and, you know, Black Sabbath and, you know, Hocus Pocus by Focus. You're talking the early 70s, you know what I mean? Journey's first album. I was the oddball, like, you know, uh, wanting to play rock music, listen to rock music, not going to dances, or, you know, I was that kid, you know, that, you know, I'd be the kid dressed in black, you know what I mean? Nowadays, I guess. So,
Well, what about that specific kind of music did it for you? Even if though you were kind of, a quote unquote the black sheep or whatever, but what about kind of the harder kind of stuff did it for you personally at such a young age?
I think it was just the energy of it, just I mean, I think a little bit too was kind of the taboo of it. You know what I mean? In the society and the culture that I grew up in, you know what I mean? To listen to rock music, to be into, to listen to Black Sabbath or, stuff like that was like, you know, it, I just found it just invigorating and heavy, and I love the melodies. Listening to stuff like the Who or stuff like that. I mean, like I said, it was the '70s. I just thought the energy of the singing, the energy of the playing, just was something that just drew me into that genre. This before I even began to really sing that kind of music. It was, you know.
Sure, but did it help you? Did it help you kind of escape from normal everyday life too? Did it help with that whole thing? Say if like you're having a bad day or something at such a young age, you would just put on this heavy kind of style and just like lock onto it.
I'm not sure if it was even. I even started to associate with people that are into that music. So while other people that were around me might have been listening to that music, I was hanging out. To be honest with the rocker white kids in school. That kind of thing. It was kind of completely. I was into that kind of music, into that kind of people that like that kind of music. Dated girls that only would, that wanted to go to. I remember going to a party as a kid, and the record I brought, everybody's playing dance music, and I said, okay, now it's time to play something, good. And I put Sweet Desolation Boulevard on. You know what I mean? I mean, that's really me. That's who I was at the time. And really, I guess I still am, but you know what I'm saying? It was, and, the people I met and the people I hung out with were into that same kind of hard rock genre. Like this is way before I even started singing. I was just really just into the music and playing drums, and just the singing part to actually sing metal came completely. Like I said, I was studying opera and went to a party, and everybody was, I'm the singing dude. So everybody's like, drinking and, having partying, and they're asking me to sing. And I was doing like, Frank Zappa, Dynamo Hum, a cappella, just doing all the vocal parts of all the high notes and everything. I'm a natural tenor.
Sure.
And as it turns out, somebody said, "Oh wow, there's a girl passed out in the front lawn." I said, "What?" So everybody runs out. This true story. They run out, and there's this crazy looking, gypsy looking girl passed out in the front lawn. She's not from our party. We're a bunch of college kids. So we bring her in. The girls are all giving her something to drink. And so I go back to what we were doing, and they're just sobering up her up in the corner. And so I'm singing for a while, and all of a sudden she sort of like snaps up and goes, "Can I use the phone?" Sure. Maybe she's going to get a ride. She calls somebody on the phone. So we're like doing our thing, and then all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. It's true story. I'm not making this up. True story. So knock at the door. We open the door, and there's all these long-haired, leather dressed, jeans and leather dressed dudes at the front door. It's like, what is all this? And they walk in. They go, "Hey, what's going on? We're here for this girl." "Oh yeah, the girl. She's right in the corner." She goes, "Yeah, so you here to pick her up?" "Oh no, we're here because she called us up and said, 'Man, you gotta hear this guy sing.'" I was like, "What?" So yeah, dude, man. She was like, "Oh my God, you gotta hear this guy sing. We're looking for a singer." And I go, "What are you at?" "Well, we're a metal band." I was like, "Well, I don't know. I don't sing metal. I sing classical music." Go, "Well, you ever heard of bands like Judas Priest?" And I said, "Oh, you mean like Victim of Changes?" And they're like, "Can you do that? Can you do that?" You know, and I'm like, "Victim of Changes." And I was like, "Oh, that's it." You know, that was it. They were just like, "That's it. You got to sing for us." And that was it. It's just crazy, crazy like that. Just like,
Sure.
okay.
Was this where were you living at this specific time though? Because we're jumping ahead, maybe 10 years or so.
Yeah, about 10 years. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious that let's go a little bit back here and just walk me through
Sure.
your specific, because you said you're from Puerto Rico, and I'm just kind of curious when the transition came, when you moved, to, I think you're from the
Well,
Midwest, if I'm not
right.
mistaken.
I was born in Puerto Rico,
Hmm.
and I came, as a child to Cleveland, Ohio. So by the time I was already 10, I'd been here for a few years. Uh,
Okay.
right. So I was born in Puerto Rico, but then moved to Ohio. And then, so I was here, like I said, in Ohio, even
It's just
though,
and
right.
not to cut you off, but it's just a random city to move to. So was it due to like a work thing,
Oh,
like your parents were
no,
working
actually,
here,
this
or?
is really funny. I will sort of give you a little history, a little bit. In the 50s, Puerto Rico became a commonwealth to America. And when all the men went off to war in Korea, society had changed. Like in World War II, when the men went off to war, the women went into the workplace. They worked at the auto plants. They worked in even the steel yards. You watch it, you look at the pictures and you see them doing that. When the 50s came, there was a movement for American women to be housewives with the skirts and the little, leave it to beaver sort of attitude of, that sort of genre. So when the Korean War came, women didn't want to go work at the auto plants, didn't want to work at the steel yards, didn't want to do those heavy jobs. And so then there was a lack of workforce in America. And somehow the idea came up, you know what? Uh, Puerto Ricans don't need a visa. Puerto Ricans are American citizens. Puerto Ricans, they went down there and literally recruited young Puerto Rican men to come to America. So that's why there's a lot of Puerto Ricans in Cleveland, in Detroit, in New York, and in all these industrial cities where there's the auto and the steel mills, because they recruited the young men. And my father, in the late 50s, was one of the people that were recruited to come to Cleveland to work
Ah.
in the auto industry. And then in the early 60s, after I was born in Puerto Rico. His family was all there. And then when he got to be the mid 60s, he moved us all to Cleveland. And that's
Interesting.
that's the story of a lot of families, New York families, and, Detroit, and, the different places where you see a lot of Puerto Ricans, other
Sure.
than Miami, which is, it's just because it's so close. It has nothing to do with, and it feels like Puerto Rico when you're there. It just has nothing to do with anything, country.
Sure. And right around the time of moving to, say, Cleveland, were you kind of developing your own kind of niche, your own I don't know, group of friends, just getting into a style, this kind of heavy style of music?
No,
And
that's where I discovered that there was that kind of music.
oh, okay,
You know what
okay,
I'm saying? In Puerto Rico, no one was listening to rock music at the time. I mean, go now. I mean, you can go. Iron Maiden can go play in Puerto Rico and have 100,000 people there. I mean, it's not the same. But back when I was a kid, there was only Spanish music. There was nothing else on the radio. There was no, American music in a sense. You know what I'm saying? There was, I had no. It wasn't until I came to America and turned on the radio and heard rock music, went, oh my God, this is great. This is what I want to listen to. And I started going out and buying records and started to do all these things as a little kid, because this is, right away I was just, you know, sucked in, had to
right.
have it, had to hear it, needed more of it, couldn't get enough of it.
N-
So I
n-
just hung around with friends and all we did was talk about music, what's the new band, at the time you're talking, AC/DC and stuff,
Sure.
you know.
And going back to the party you had mentioned earlier, was this your first actual project and getting into a band? Like besides all the
No,
besides
because
playing drums in the Spanish?
I've been in bands before, rock bands during the 70s as the drummer.
Okay,
Rock in fusion bands and different, projects. Nothing that, did any actual like recording, play drums and sang on other people's projects. This was already, I was already like 20, by the time this happened, I was in the middle of college. And that's when um, it was the right move for me. I literally gave my drum set away. As soon as I started singing with the band, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to pursue this music. As soon as I started singing metal, it was the weirdest thing because I was singing classical music. I mean, first tenor. I mean, I was performing opera, and my teachers would go, Juan. They'd go, it's funny. Go, Juan. Oh, the voice is good. It's great, but you're too much rock in your voice. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I'm doing all the fa la la's like everybody else. I don't get it. And there was just something about my voice that just seemed to be, I couldn't get away from that edge that, even though I have a really clean voice, it's still, there's this, this rock thing that's in my head that I just had to use and do. So,
sure. And let's go to forming this project with the guys coming in and saying, "Oh, this song and blah blah blah," and obviously,
right.
walk me through kind of the next phase in this particular moment in your life.
Well, this band eventually was called Striker. And at first we were just like any other band. We did, covers of, and this is bands coming up now. This is the beginning of the 80s, 80, 79, 80. So you're, Saxon and Scorpions and, doing all this sort of stuff, that this genre that we were like, wow, this new wave of metal that was coming in. You know what I mean? So we weren't playing Black Sabbath. We weren't playing, Led Zeppelin. We were definitely right away jumped on this new genre of music, really, that that was called metal. And I was lucky enough to be in right at that edge when that all started in Cleveland. I'm like one of the people that are considered like, I guess you'd call the golden age of Cleveland metal. That Cleveland metal, when all of a sudden Cleveland had metal bands, because prior to that it was just rock bands and metal bands, and we were like, Striker and eventually Attacks and bands like that was like right at that edge where bands were starting up with the, like, in Cleveland, like Breaker and Destructor and all these other, the Spud Monsters and all these other bands that were like all of a sudden coming up and doing metal in the Cleveland area. So Striker
Interesting.
started just doing covers.
Uh-huh.
Right away we said, you know what, let's start writing our own songs. Let's start doing what, right away getting into what the other bands that we were immunizing, that were influencing us, uh,
Sure.
let's not just play stuff that sounds like the Scorpions or, let's actually do music. And right away our first show was, like I said, opening up for Breaker, and I was out there right off the bat. So this Stryker, my first metal band, and I dressed like an opera singer. I know I did. I wore a white shirt, black slacks, shoes, I actually would, and people were like, what is this about? And I'm up there screaming high notes, and you're like, what? And so then eventually I changed it to looking more metal, but I didn't know what to even wear when I first started.
Sure. So let's go to kind of like you getting into the recording studio at first, and what like I believe you had a demo for this particular band, if I'm not mistaken. So correct me if I'm wrong here, and just walk me through. Right. Just walk me through kind of your first kind of, I don't know, recollection of just entering a recording studio for the first time, and I don't know, give me the whole like essence of being in that studio and that time and place. Was it exciting for you, or?
Yeah, you can imagine we were young. I was, like 20, 21, an adult, but everyone else, I remember the guitar player was only like 16, Steve Derision. Bass player 18, the drummer 7. I mean, young, they were young guys. And I was just a little bit older, but basically not much more younger than them and older than them. And we just decided we wrote some cool songs, and people were it's funny when I look back now, because someone sent me a flyer the other day, and it's 30 something years ago now, and Stryker was the headliner, and in these other bands. I'm thinking, really, we were at that already? Like literally went from opening up to like doing our own shows, and we'd written a bunch of songs, and we went into the studio, and we didn't just go into like some hack studio, which is crazy too. Now, I don't know how this happened. We went to a place called Beechwood Studios, which was like the most expensive studio in the city. You're talking about, you walk in and there's a hardwood floor with the grand piano in the middle of it. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Like that kind of place. And, we were just young and just really, wanted to do things right, wanted to sound really great. I mean, musically we're it's still very young, very edgy, not really, you know what I mean? It's the first crack at doing anything. There's some really cool stuff, and really stuff I go, well, I can't believe I decided that, saying that, that kind of thing, it's first time of doing it. But, it's something I really definitely remember. Paul Hammond, I hope he's still alive, was the engineer. Great guy. I mean, legend here in our area for when it comes for recording stuff. I'm fortunate to have worked with so many great people, so many great bands and musicians. It's lucky, really luck, and just hard work too. But
Sure. Now, I'm kind of curious with this specific recording, in that when you kind of opened your mouth and heard you for the first time, did you have to kind of change anything with recording because you kind of thought you knew it all until you're under that microscope?
I think that after that recording, I mean, when I first started going out and singing shows with Stryker, I was just out there balls to the wall. I mean, even after, the next band became War Master and Attacks, even when Attacks first started, I was still completely, singing till I was hoarse, or just singing all day, or getting up there and just screaming my brains out, and running around like an idiot. Really, I didn't, the energy level was just out the room. I was just so excited, and so I couldn't believe that I was doing it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And in the studio, I mean, now I've done it so much that, the performing live and performing in the studio is completely two different things. There's so much you have to be so on, and so, everything has to really be perfect in the studio, because you have to think to your mind. When that first session with Stryker, you're just in your wide-eyed, you're amazing you're in there. now I go into the studio and I think to myself, this is forever. And that's when I tell anybody that's, go into the studio, just remember that, I'll be very critical to the point of like saying to yourself, is that good? Is that, well, no, you think yourself, this will not be changed. This will be forever. People, you know what I mean? This is the recording. This isn't some live. It's next day you can go back and do better. You know what I mean? This is
Absolutely.
it. You know what I mean? So I'm really, really a perfectionist. I wasn't at the first recording. I was just, I was
And
just.
but at least you had, you got experience, especially if this is like your first outing and what you're saying is true. This is like a big studio to kind of be in, and it's not like you recorded it in your garage or something. This is like
No,
a
it was.
professional
Yeah, it was
kind of studio.
professional. It was like as professional. You couldn't get more professional. I don't think I still don't. I don't record in places like that. Even I can. I record so much I couldn't afford to doing my recordings in a studio like that. It's
Well,
just
back in those times though that you're mentioning, I mean, that's the only way you could be, unless you did it in your garage where like you wouldn't get a professional
right,
recording like you would in a
right.
professional studio. Like now you can
You're
do it in
you're
your garage. You can literally do it
right.
in your
You're
house.
absolutely right. The technology was not available to everybody like that. Exactly. You
Sure.
literally were going from a cassette recorder or a studio. There wasn't no, setting up a studio in your house with digital, digital tech in waves on, or
Sure.
Pro
Well,
Tools on your computer. That technology only existed in studios, and it was analog tape.
absolutely. And going off of that point too, obviously everybody knows you had to be spot on. This was
Right,
there were no auto tunes or anything of
right,
that nature. I mean, if you
right.
wanted to
Everything had to
take
be right. There was no redoing it. If something had to be redone, and it was very recently I was in the studio. I have the drummer for Sunless Sky, and other people I've worked with are young people now. They're in their 20s, mid 20s. And when I tell them that we used to run on tape, and if we did something wrong and had to redo it, we had to slice the tape of a razor and
Mhm.
remove that section of tape, and then re-record it. And there's a little like tape that synced them together. It was literally that
Well,
archaic.
and you only had so many times to redo that specific take.
Right,
So,
right. It
going
wasn't
off
it
of
was like we can just keep doing it over and over and over now if we want.
absolutely, you can do it as many times as you want now. But, going off of this, you get the demo in hand, and do you start passing it out, and kind of what's the reception like for this specific one? Because I'm only asking this because it's your first ever recording, so I'm just want to get some sort of backstory with you on it.
Well, I right away, I think, there were, we got played on like, the different college stations, that sort of stuff. But I mean, like I said, this was a fairly short-lived band, so there wasn't like this huge hype or anything like that, or
Mhm.
it's just sort of like a starting point for me, and um the drummer of that band went on to Mike Hansen went on to actually be on big reports. I think he was in Propane for a while, and that sort of thing. But mostly it was just like a starting point band, and it was just locally sort of thing. And now I think that people for like in Europe and different places of the world or different parts of America, like, oh my God, we'd love to have that tape, that kind of thing. But really at the time it wasn't, other than the popularity in a local area basis, it wasn't, that, you know, that big of a thing, in a
Well,
sense.
did you start to notice other bands, obviously around your specific area, kind of doing the same things, recording demos and recording?
Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
right. I mean, um, that's how everything was done then. It was like, everybody just put out demos. It wasn't the proliferation of like contacting record labels or any of that sort of stuff that you're able to do really now, or it was really on the street, passing stuff out to people. Here's the flyer, here's the cassette. I mean, it literally was word of mouth. Um, friend to friend, metal friend, people, in the scene, from people to people, going, oh man, you got to see this band. We're going to this show. There was a magazine that came out the same time, a newsletter called The Iron Planet, and this guy was just like, his dude's name was Craig Bobby, and people still like cherish those things because it was literally printed out on, one of those machines or something. You know what I mean?
Well, right. It was a fanzine. I mean,
Yeah, fanzine, exactly. Just to hand out, and that's how people knew what show was coming up or what band was releasing some other demo or stuff like that. It was literally almost beyond just one step beyond word of mouth, really.
Interesting. So you guys had your own. So what you're telling me, I mean, LA and Orange County, all the interviews I've done with people from back then, where we had this whole kind of community, not just bands playing, but people doing magazines or radio people. And it seems like you kind of had that same almost connection in Cleveland. You had community.
It was, and it was very close knit though. It was, in simple words, there was. Bill Peters started a show, Metal on Metal, playing metal music. And then that literally, you got Bill Peters, you had Craig Bobby, the Iron Planet, you had, it wasn't like this proliferation of different radio stations or a bunch of people doing stuff. It was a very close-knit sort of almost society of people that were pushing each other and trying to strive for each other. And Cleveland bands, I don't know, what the LA scene was like, but Cleveland bands weren't like Dog Eat Dog. Is that the right? You know what I'm saying?
Well, LA was absolutely like that. It's been well documented that LA was. I
didn't want to do anything disparaging by saying it, but I've always in scenes like LA and New York are definitely like Dog Eat Dog. Cleveland was definitely the opposite of that. Bands helped each other. Once one band, like I said, I was in Attacks, and Attacks did, we went from Bill Peters' show to like playing radio stations like all over America, our demo. And we were then we were in our mid-20s. We're actually could play. I could actually sing. You know what I mean? It was like, we knew we were good. And we went after it. I mean, I remember we had a radio station in town that wouldn't play our demo. And so now this is like early 80s. So we went in the radio station. People were like, hey, that's like a movie, but this happened before that movie. We actually went in the radio station, hijacked the radio, tied the girl up in a chair, and played our demo over and over and over till the police came. There's a picture of like in that campus newspaper, us on the cars, the handcuffs on, but it was real shit. I mean, that was us at the time, and Cleveland bands were doing stuff like that, and but we were like helping if bands get. We were helping each other. Now, once I, for instance, got signed to Pure Steel, my first thing I was doing was helping other bands to get signed. Other bands to, because for me, it's not just about me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just about me. It's just not about my bands. It's about everyone. It's about our community. It's about, I like to say that when we rise up together. If we rise up together, we all rise. Not just me. I don't want just me. You know what I mean? That's great, but it's really, I'd rather raise the whole scene than just me.
Absolutely. That's the whole reason why I got into playing in a band and starting a podcast is the same reason. It's just, it's not all about me. Like,
that's great.
I think when you and going off your point, I think when you kind of rise up together, you all win. It's not just like, because it's harder for one person to make it, but if we all make it up, it's like now we have the support team where, we're better off.
Right. Once it started happening, you saw bands starting to get signed. You saw record labels starting to come and do showcases in Cleveland, and it just went from one band. It went, from, like I said, from Destructor, Spun Monsters, next came Shock Paris, next thing you know, we have Mushroomhead. You know what I mean? And bands that were members of the band I was in, Ritual was signed to Massacre Records, and members of that band formed Mushroomhead. You know what I mean? It's just, and when we got signed to Massacre Records, we got other bands. Mystic got signed, and other bands from that era. The Spud Monsters got signed, and now with Pure Steel, the same thing. Everybody's helping each other, is trying to raise the scene. I guess we always feel like I guess it's Cleveland. We feel that we can play with the best of them, and we want to be there too. So
absolutely. But it's also too that like you guys are some of the only guys doing it in your area, so why not stick together?
Right.
Now I gotta ask, because I've been doing my research for the Attacks project, and I know you're still with them and whatnot. There is a small kind of footnote in that you have an unreleased kind of album, and I just want to get some more information on this, because I think Metal Blade Records is like interested in signing, and you guys went in the studio and recorded a full record, but it never got released.
Yeah, well, see, the story of that was Attacks had, like I said, when our demo came out, we started to not only get played in Cleveland, we started getting played on radio stations in different parts of America. College radio stations would message us back, say, "Hey, your demo is #1 at our radio station," and it'd be like different cities, all kinds of cities, and we start to get really, really noticed, and we'd start doing showcases it wasn't just for them, it was for Epic and Island and IRS, and I have to say that we got out of our heads. Our demo got to Metal Blade. Metal Blade sent us reached out to us. "Hey, listen, we really like you guys. We hear you guys are doing great things. We want more music. Why don't you guys record something?" And we sat down and said, "Okay, you know what? Why don't we get together?" And we recorded an entire album. And after that album was recorded, then the A&R guy from Epic heard and came, "No, forget that. That's just an up-and-coming label. Okay? Epic is a big label. You don't want to be signed to Metal Blade. You want to be signed to Epic." And he flew us out to Chicago, and we did a demo for Epic, and we just shelved the Metal Blade album.
Interesting.
We just literally said, "Oh well, we have bigger fish to fry." We figured we're and we just dropped it, and it was left as a rough recording without any really, initial recordings, without any of the, like imagine you sit down to do an album and you do your first versions of the songs, and that's the way we basically left it. Never went back and actually did anything.
There's no thrills on it or anything like that. It's just like kind of bare bones and whatnot.
Yeah, it's just bare bones. It's practically, it's beyond live. You know what I mean? But it's like there's no hardcore, and the performances are just awesome. It's just like so great. The only trouble was, and I spoke to Pure Steel. Pure Steel's like, "Oh my God, we should release this album." The only problem is and it's just not me. When I first, it's a bit of a backstory for this. When I first got signed to Pure Steel, they were an up-and-coming label from Germany. And they were doing a lot of this releasing of demo stuff. They were like grabbing all these young bands that were, and releasing their demo stuff. And then when I became involved with them, I went to Germany and actually sat with the record label and, the people, the president, it's like a family, Andreas and Michaela and Marcus, and just sat there with all and said, you know what? I love this. The only trouble is I think it could be better. Because when you hear a Pure Steel record, you know it's like, hey, this is like the raw shit. Okay. But I said, when you listen to a Metal Blade album or a Nuclear Blast album, when you listen to these albums, you're not wondering what's the quality of the recording. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
You know that you're going to love the music if you buy Pure Steel records at the time, because that's the genre. You know you're going to love the music because it's metal, but you're not wondering if you pick up one of these labels if it's going to sound okay. And I said that's where the problem was, and we completely changed their format from releasing demos to actually having bands re-record and do amazing sounding stuff. So I can't go back now and then say, oh, by the way, we should release my 8-track album.
Well, why not?
Do you know what I'm saying? Well, because it's this kind of thing that I worked really hard with them to stop doing.
So
do you know what I'm saying?
So initially it was going to be re-released, and
yes.
Okay. What year?
And then I basically in the conversation, you know what? Because we started doing quality control. We got not only we have the record label, we have a guy in Austria that does all the mastering. We went from releasing, demoing stuff to releasing amazing sounding records. It has to be amazing. It just can't be okay. Can't be all right. It has to be great. Okay. And so when we went and listened to the actual recording, say, okay, if you're going to use that as the line, this album is here. It's short of that line. And as so I'm not going to release something that, just sounds,
I got it.
Sounds right. Because the only recording of it is from the original tape, reel that sat in a cabinet for 30 something years. Had to be baked. I don't know if you're familiar with that, right? You have to bake it.
I'm not familiar with the whole process, but
you have to bake it, because if you have to take the tape, which is crazy to think about. You have to put it in an oven, an actual oven, and bake it at a low temperature, so the magnetic particles adhere back to the tape. If not, if you try to play that tape, even to transfer it, the particles literally come off the tape onto the reader, right? I mean, it's ruined.
Yeah, and you can also be ruined while doing the baking process too. So you have to be extremely careful.
Yeah, it's madness. Like when we did the Attacks, we did reissue all the demo stuff other than that album for Attacks, the 20 Years the Hard Way album. The difference is all those recordings were all 24 track. They were all 24 track completed recordings. You know what I'm saying? Whereas the Tax album from 1986 was literally just the rough 8-track, basically, session that we were sending to Metal Blade to say, what do you think?
Oh, okay.
To go in to record a full-blown album. So it's the album, but it's basically the full-blown the album of songs, but not the 20. Right. They're not 24 recording of them.
Now let's move ahead real quick. So why didn't you guys ever release it kind of after, maybe not getting signed to Epic or not getting signed to a Metal Blade around this specific time?
Well, what happened was, after we'd flown to Chicago with Epic, we came back and did a showcase here in Cleveland, sold out show at a club. I'm packed packed. It must be 500 people there. And played the show. And that weekend, the guitar player went to a club and ended up killing someone.
Oh, okay. Okay. Wow. Okay. So
that's a true story. He ended up, getting into a bar fight and ending up killing someone in a bar fight. And that's basically the end of attacks. So right away when that happened, I even said, listen, I have tons of guitar players, amazing guitar players to replace him. Epic, gone. All the labels, gone. They were like, we don't want any part of it.
Right. It's probably a PR nightmare for them.
Right.
So they probably don't want to deal with.
Right. It literally went from there to gone.
Wow.
Overnight.
So going off of this point or whatever, why not release the 86 demo around this time? Just because of all of the kind of what happened, surrounding it, because the guitar player played on the actual album?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's the guitar player on the album, right?
Sure.
So I tried to keep the band together, like grabbed another guitar player, did some things, but it's just that whatever was there was just gone.
Right.
You know what I mean? And while I was doing one of those attack shows, just really just trying to keep, deciding what to do. You know what I mean? What's the next step? Because, that's when I met, actually, first off, I met Tall Paul. He was real young. We were doing shows with Chastain at the time. And he was like, oh my God, he walked up to me and said, Tall Paul, who eventually we years later will end up in Dark Arena together. He walked up to me. He was still 6'7" maybe at the time, looking way up to me. He goes, you're going to be my lead singer someday. And he's like 15 or 16 years old. I swear to God. I said, really? Okay, sure, whatever, dude. Big guy. So, but during those shows too, that's when I met the guys from Torment. And at the time, there was a local label called Auburn by Bill Peters, that almost all the local bands were signed to, in a sense of some sort of, there was compilation album, Heavy Artillery, and all these bands were getting, Jag Panzer was on it. All these bands that were like working together toward getting signed to bigger labels.
And I'm kind of curious, did you guys tour a lot around this specific time? Did you personally, if with any of these projects, just tour around, or were you just kind of playing local gigs?
Well, both, not like touring. It was mostly like we would travel out of town to go to different Midwest, New York or Chicago, but it was individual shows. It wasn't like actually, going on tours and stuff like that. We jump on a tour for a few dates, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. And so with Bill Peters' label, maybe was his ultimate goal just to keep getting exposure for you guys and
right, for all the bands for Cleveland. Yeah.
And maybe he had the PR connections for it too, because I don't know how difficult it was to get PR back then. I don't know how you would go about.
Yeah, a lot of the bands, some of the bands from the label were doing things, like flying to Europe and doing festivals and doing Vakin, they were, so it, like I said, the big band that was Shock Paris that was on his label, who then moved on and signed to IRS and had was on MTV and stuff like that. And, like I said, it was basically an up and coming label to help Cleveland bands.
Absolutely.
So, that was his Metal to Metal show and Auburn Records and stuff like that. And that's when I met the guys from Torment, who were also on Auburn. We both were on the same compilation. And they asked if I'd want to sing for them. And I said, you know what? Attacks isn't going anywhere. And so I joined Torment. And right away, Torment got signed to Massacre. We changed our name to Ritual. And
no, just Ritual, not Ritual of Torment.
Right.
Okay.
That was what happened was we got signed to Massacre as Torment.
Gotcha.
Went to Europe, was recording there in Germany, and the record label came during the session and said, "Hey, listen, guys, we'd like to tell you that there is a German band called Torment." Oh, so you guys actually need to change your name. So we sat around one night in the studio trying to think of a name, and true story, on the table was a Testament album, Ritual. And we said, why not Ritual? And they said, hey, there's already Craig Godey's Ritual, one guitar player from Singers. It says, yeah, but I think that's just like he's not really a band, you know? So the label said, we're just going to go for it. And so we released the album as Ritual and went to #1 in Europe, #1 in Germany. Did really well. Unfortunately for Ritual, of course, that's right in '92, the start of the grunge era in America. So we couldn't get any distribution in America at all. We had a #1 album in Germany, in Europe, in Belgium, in France, Europe. And it was
out here. You couldn't give it away, probably.
I literally, dude, I have a chart somewhere. In Germany, where Ritual, The Trials of Torment's #1, and #2 is Metallica's The Black Album. You know, and it's like, oh my god! And I couldn't get a record label to release the album. I couldn't get airplay. We couldn't get it, literally, because Massacre was a German label, and the American press was just like whatever.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So it was like crazy.
That's crazy, dude.
Yeah,
so going off of this, what were you kind of doing in the 90s, in the mid 90s, when the grunge era was kind of happening? I mean, from 93 to 2000, 2001?
Right. Well, see what there, I think what I was doing wasn't much different than a lot of people that, started off doing metal and stuff like that. I started, being a session singer. Started singing to other people's records, doing commercials. I'm on a Burger King commercial.
That's awesome.
I swear to God. So it's like, you start doing that. I became like a studio singer and started doing that kind of thing, and just was, looking to see what I'm going to do on different projects. And Ritual basically, like I said, broke up because half the members went on and started it's influenced by bands, like Faith No More and stuff like that, and they branched off and started to do Mushroomhead, and so that's where Mushroomhead kind of started. And so Ritual broke up. Half the members went in that direction. Half the members sort of wandered off and, like me, to do other projects, and that's when I met again Tall Paul.
Okay, so this is when he comes back into the fold. Now Sure. Now, what transpires from here, though?
He came up to me and said that he wanted to do this Prague project. And I was like, a Prague project? I sing metal. Now I'm like a metalhead. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But the funny thing was that growing up, I had a big time in my favorite band is Rush.
Okay.
My favorite bands were Rush and Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. There was a time in my life where I only listened to Prague, which is really strange. When he said he wanted to do a Prague album, I was like, you know what? I would really, really love to do that.
That'd be awesome. Do some Gentle Giant or something?
Yeah, that's what I mean, this is kind of like where Dark Arena started. It was called Arena.
And now, how did you guys wind up with this specific name? Because again, and I'm not trying to put it down, but it's kind of like a generic kind of name. It's not
right. Oh, I forgot to say the reason why you're thinking of Ritual Torment is because I jumped over that part. After the band broke up, people wanted me to re-release the album, and in that meantime, not only was there a band called Torment, but all of a sudden, I think from Chicago or someplace, got called Ritual.
Right. There's a couple of them.
Yeah, called Ritual. So I could not release the album as either Torment or Ritual. And so I said, well, then we'll just call it Ritual of Torment and
Makes
release the
sense to
album
me. Makes sense
and
to me.
reissue the album. Right. Because the band was really interested just, having the album out there because, the Massacre album was so hard to get. And
Gotcha.
everybody kept asking everywhere we'd go, any of the members would go do shows. Man, I really would love to have a copy of that Ritual album. And so then we just basically an independent pressing of it. So that was that.
Now
But
with Arena, how did you guys? So you meet Tall Paul, and then what kind of transpires? Obviously, it's like you have to get other members. So were you just kind
yeah,
of
right.
asking
See,
around?
that's I even said to Paul, Arena isn't really. I even said to Paul, I think there's a band called Arena, a Prague band called Arena, and there was. But he was like, no, this is the name. I love this name. It's going to be Arena. And so I asked the drummer of Ritual if he'd be interested. Emery Seal. So that's the drummer on the first Dark Arena album is Emery Seal. And then we met this bass player from a Rush Tribute band, Chris Thomas. And so it was just a perfect fit. And so we started doing this Prague. The original version of the band was very proggy with no keyboards or anything like that. It was all, a million notes and, me singing all these crazy octaves and stuff like that.
Now, how do you find your place in a prog band as opposed to say just just a heavy kind of metal band? Because you have to pick your spots as a a high soaring vocalist like yourself.
Yeah, it was definitely an education. Let me just say that, because Tall Paul didn't, and still all the way to unfortunately his passing, never wrote songs like a metal band would, with chorus and verse and chorus and stuff like that. He literally wrote instrumentals, and he always wrote them in harmonic major scales, and very, very, it was meant to be, where I sang was what I fitted. We were influenced by bands like Watchtower and that kind of genre of like this really almost fusion a band.
Like a like a progressive thrash or technical thrash or
Yes,
like funk.
absolutely.
Okay.
You nailed it. Exactly. That was the original idea, but it was more prog, and it was okay. We did a demo and it was all right. There wasn't this, overwhelming like woo for everyone. You know what I mean? For
Well,
like
this
the
was in the mid-90s though, too, right?
right,
So
because we were like completely playing stuff that no one was even listening to. I mean, it was like this very prog stuff, and
right.
so it kind of like faded out, and we started to record some stuff, and Paul, I started doing other projects again, and Paul started doing another band and other bands. And then we got back together a few years later, and Paul had this, cathartic moment. And he was like, you know what? Let's change the band up and make it heavy. Instead of trying to be this super proggy band, let's make it more thrash, even elements of death in there. Let's, instead of me singing, like John Anderson, let's actually put a little, let's bring it down and actually make a little,
put some grit on your voice.
Yeah, put some grit on, crit on it. Let's actually, so it literally in the span of a few months went from arena that really didn't do anything to dark arena.
And I know this was like a couple years after. This is like mid 2000s. So at this point,
Right.
metal had kind of the state of metal kind of had changed. You went through all the pop punk stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then kind of, in your opinion, though, where I'm getting with this is, in your opinion, what changed to where it became, it got back to the roots of metal again? Was it all these European festivals that were happening, or
Yeah,
was
I
it?
think it was not, it's just that it was all of a sudden there was this change to heaviness. All of a sudden there was like, you know, okay, you have grunge, you have all this pop metal and stuff like that, and all of a sudden this really heavy metal, this death metal and thrash metal became what was cool. You know what I mean? Became what was the cutting edge sort of stuff. And um and that's, I mean, that really changed everything, because it changed how everybody plays. You know what I mean? All of a sudden the hair bands were gone. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, the grunge was gone. All of a sudden it was metal, and even people that were doing melodic metal were doing it aggressively. You know what I mean? Dream Theater isn't just some prog band that's doing, they're really aggressive about it. They're really technical about it, and really, that kind of thing.
Interesting. So do you think that, like, kind of, I don't know, some of the Bay Area bands getting back together around this time, the Exoduses and
Oh,
everybody on the
absolutely.
Clash of the Titans?
Slayer. Oh, all of a sudden, yeah. Oh, definitely. That is like it. That resurgence, that's the word I'm looking for, right?
Sure.
That resurgence is what really changed uh bands and everything. And the bands that we were listening to all of a sudden became bands like Annihilator and Nevermore, and these new, those European bands that were doing um you know uh, Pagan's Mind, and doing this sort of heavy there wasn't like this, you know
Right, like a Stradivarius or
yeah, right,
uh
right.
gotcha. So okay, so cool. So after changing the name, kind of what is your next step? What do you want to do differently on this project, as that you couldn't do on any of the other projects beforehand?
Like I said, it became right away, it went from 6-string guitars to 7-string guitars, 7-string guitars and 6-string basses, 8-string guitars. It went, doing really technical music, but doing it in a very aggressive, heavier way. And each album, that initial album was, initially we added keyboards to add kind of like this kind of a background, almost like a goth thing in there. And that kind of faded more and more, and keyboards became more, less and less prominent, I guess you would say it. We still have a keyboard player, but that keyboard element became less prominent, became more like
Atmospheric.
behind this really heavy technical prog, but was almost verging on thrash and death metal. And I was doing,
And
I guess me, I guess me.
sure. But a question I have, though, because you mentioned this earlier, where Tall Paul, like, he was writing kind of instrumentally, and then you guys kind of get heavier, and did he approach songwriting differently around this time period, so it was easier for you to kind of pick where the verse should go, or chorus should go, or pre-chorus, or any of
Uh,
that?
no, I mean, Paul really, like I said, really wrote kind of like instrumentals,
Sure.
you know, and he had ideas for where vocals should be, but he didn't like there's if you listen to Dark Arena's music and even the new album, uh the last one we did, and before his passing, we actually started recording. This is a funny thing. This is like Dark Arena, the new album, Worlds Apart, is easily the heaviest album.
I really
Uh,
enjoyed it. So it
yeah,
was
and
really fucking heavy.
it's like he wasn't thinking about vocally like that at all. He was just thinking about, um, he knew I would find places and find parts, and um, he just wanted to be really heavy. You can hear there's never any in darker music. There's never any of this open chords. You know what I mean? That's
Mhm.
where like typically you have these open chords because you don't want all this music going on behind the vocals versus are usually open or just chugging or this, in metal. If you think about it, if you actually analyze it,
Sure.
in
Well, there's not a lot
dark
of
arena,
space in metal, so it
there's
compared.
space.
Sure.
Right, right. And whereas dark arena definitely there isn't these spaces. Topol didn't write that way. He wrote he wrote parts that were, you know, technically driving, and he didn't think about how the vocals would fit in more as they, once I started coming in with my ideas, and I loved being that I could come up with these, off time ideas, you know what I mean, in there. It goes, oh yeah, do that, let's move this over here and that kind of thing. Then he would
So
get into the vocal. Once I started to add vocals to him, then he would write, but it was always after all the music was written. Yeah.
interesting, and it seems like you had more kind of freedom, I would say, during this, this whole project, where it's like, you might not. It might be straight 16th notes, or technically, he's technically proficient at the riffs, but you can, once you find your spots, then you have more freedom to be like, okay, well, this lyric would fit here rather than.
Right, right. And a lot of times you'll see I'm not following the guitar so much. You know what I mean? I'm doing, rhythmically something that's
Yeah, you're doing the contrast to what
exactly
the
contrast.
guitar riff
Yeah,
would
yeah.
be.
And like I said, a lot of the music, Dark Arena, for being around, if you take Arena that started in the mid 90s and Dark Arena that ended 20 years later,
Hmm.
when Top Hall, passed away, um there's only like 3 dozen shows, actual live performances in there. Arena, Dark Arena doesn't matter. There were all this Dark Arena was mostly all studio, rehearsing and going in the studio and recording and re-recording. That's how come there's a whole nother album, Non-Human Contact, with 16 songs. These are all songs that were recorded for albums, and Paul just said, nah. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I think it's more beneficial to do that rather than just play a bunch of live shows, because recording, like going back to what you said at the beginning of this interview, the recording's forever. It's
Right.
you know what I mean? So,
Right. Right.
um,
Right.
now let's go to the new record, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
It's
let's
not
do
really
it.
technically the new record, right? World of Horror, and I want to get the whole recording process for this specific record in question, and just what did you guys want to do differently on this one compared to, say, your previous record?
Well, I mean, Paul really wanted this to be heavy. It was, you know, we did a lot of experimentation, I guess, in a lot of the early records. Some, there would be heavy songs, and there'd be, songs that were, there was in the background. Dark Arena is still a Prague metal band in a sense, and this album is definitely the, the album before, with, the Ode to the Ancients. I don't know if you're familiar with that album prior, with the Temptation of Christ, where it's 9 minutes of endless, uh you know uh finger noodling, you know what I mean, where it's just, you know what I mean. This
Sure.
album was definitely not like this album was. He was thinking, he wanted driving, he wanted power, he wanted, it to be heavy, and just uh, um, to be the statement, and it
Well,
was really funny when, like when we started doing all the albums, doing the songs, and different versions of the albums, and there's demos of the different records as we went along, because at that time too I was in all these bands already. So a lot of the recording he was like doing in the studio, he would just literally spend, you know, he spent a couple years in the studio, and I would just, come and help and go back to other bands and do a tour, do a tour, come back, work on other things with them, and go do other bands, record other albums. And I'd be finishing whole other albums and doing tours and coming back, and he'd be still working on the records.
Do you think that was a sign? Do you think that was gave you more freedom to want to branch off and do other bands, though, because this was kind of more of a studio kind of?
Yes, like I
thing?
said,
Okay.
it literally, like I said, at first, Dark Arena started as the four members became five. Then we started, like I said, five members became six members became seven, and in order to recreate what we were trying to record live.
Sure.
And and it just became, when you're talking that kind of music, how technical it was, and how how much time was involved, it became very, very difficult to hold all those members. It was a constant rotation of people until Paul basically got sick of it, and Dark Arena became a studio project.
Sure. And now with the World of Horror record, what was the most difficult? What was the most difficult challenge for you personally as a vocalist on this specific record? And what did you kind of reach that specific goal on it?
Well, there are a lot of high notes on the record. and I don't know if that was really purposeful on my part. When I listen to it now, I go, wow, dude, man, you're just like, screaming your brains out. But I really wanted to be melodic. There's a lot of layering on this album, a lot of harmonies, and just, really trying to be, I guess, over the top. I mean, really, I guess a little bit, wanting to be heavy, wanting to be like, a statement, to where the band was, to where I was at the time.
And going off of this point, did you guys know that he was sick or whatever, and wanted to kind of?
No, this is the crazy thing. And here's the crazy thing too. When the album, up until that time, up until we started to record that album, I've already been signed a couple labels with other bands, doing all these things. And Dark Arena was completely independent, not on a record label. Because Tall Paul didn't trust record labels. And I kept saying to him, listen, when finally I was in Pure Steel for a while, I go, listen, these people these are my people. I even work for them. I helped them sign other bands. I wouldn't be doing that if I didn't believe in them.
Sure.
You need to get out of Top Paul's. You're an amazing talent making amazing music, and no one is hearing it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I finally convinced him. You're talking 2017. You're talking 20 years later to finally sign a record label. And that's when we started to record the album. And because it was a statement, it was like he wanted to be, okay, it got through to him. I go, listen, man, no one knows who you are. I mean, think of that. You know what I mean? To be this good and not be known is just crazy. And so this was like his statement of like, wow, I'm going to really come out. I'm going to blow this up. It's going to be the most, and we thought Ode to the Ancients, the album prior to this, was like epic. It was the most beautiful album I could think of. It was so amazing and so heavy. We had we had these two death metal singers on it too, these girls, because we wanted to be really heavy.
Sure.
And the European audiences were like, oh no, I don't want to say, we want one. We don't want these other girls singing death metal over this. And we removed my parts to insert more death metal on it, because he thought it was, is going to be like that kind of genre where it's, you had the operatic singer and you had the death metal singer. That was kind of where he was kind of thinking, and that didn't work. How great Ode to the Ancients is, it just, It
Sure.
just it didn't fly. And that this album was then that statement of like, this is going to be us, me and you. We're just going to blow this out. Now we know what we want to do. And he had this vision, and that was what World of Horror was.
And how much of this album actually got recorded while he was with us? Was it just all in the it
He
all
was
got finished and
no,
just
he recorded all of it.
okay.
He all the way to the completion of the album. As a matter of fact, we then, like I said, there were other songs that were he considered too proggy for the album that we also recorded. It's a whole nother 6 songs, 7 songs that were not on the album because he, after listening back, goes, no, this is too proggy. I want just
All the heavy, not the proggy.
heavy on it.
Okay.
Heavy on it. The only one that got on there that's proggy is Destiny's Bridge. But there's like a whole nother another 6-7 songs of that Destiny's Bridge style of thing that we actually recorded. So that album, the album was completed. We started working on this other proggy stuff when he had a heart attack and died.
Oh no!
So he got and it's the irony, the bitter irony, is he really, that first album didn't even get reissued yet. So Alien Factor didn't even, he just got signed. Wow. So the plan was signed, going to reissue the Alien Factor album as you're completing the Worlds of Horror album, and basically completed the Worlds of Horror album, and we started working on this other proggy stuff, and he died.
Wow. Dude,
and so then
the title track, the first 2 tracks on this album rule. I know it's the title track and obviously the band name, but but like they're just super fucking heavy. And I think that your vocals work so well in this specific project and this specific album in hand. And just, I think people need to fucking hear this. So, going off of this, like where, what is, in your opinion, what is the best method to, I don't know, just kind of hearing music? Are you a streaming guy? Are you a, physical media guy? Are you a, I don't know. Are you,
wow. You know what? I mean, I obviously I love, records in hand, vinyl, CDs, stuff like that, but I listen to a lot of stuff. Like you're saying, streaming, YouTube, that sort of stuff. Just listening to Septic Flesh, that show with the symphony last night. You know what I mean? Just I love listening to all kinds of different genres of music, and just I think it's wide open now with the digital and stuff like that, and it's a new world because of COVID. And like during this time, I completed 2 albums.
Wow.
2 albums.
Good for you, dude.
Yeah, at the time, yeah. The Blind Cross album with the band in Germany. And the funny, it's digital. It's so great because I never even spoke to them. They speak German. I speak English. I actually was married to a German lady for like 30 years. And just know how enough to get a beer and laid. That's about it. And but they spoke nothing but German. I don't speak enough English, so we recorded the entire album without speaking to each other.
Wow. And it worked out great. So
worked out great. Then I did the Juan Ricardo project. That's a straight up prog album. That I've always wanted to do now. Like it's an album that was just prog. There's and the keyboard player is actually the original keyboard player when we started Dark Arena, which is Vincent V, who's a shredder sort of keyboard player. And then we sort of said, no, that's not the right idea, that everyone's just shredding,
Totally.
So
what is next for you? What do you got down, coming down the pipeline?
Wow. A lot. Like I said, a lot. I have, everything is in sequence and as I'm working on. Right now in the middle of recording the new Sunless Sky album, which is the 3rd album and the 3rd version of the band. If you may know, the band started as a side project when I was in Dark Arena and it was so long in the studio. I just decided to form a live band, and it started as a 5-piece, became like a thrash 4-piece, and now it's sort of verged into where I play bass and sing, like sort of like a sort of it's hard to describe. It's a metal band, but it's like I say, different. You'd have to when you hear it, you'd have to hear it. It's
Okay.
it's just different. A
And
different band.
what is going on with Dark Arena? I know, from according to doing research on you specifically, you're no longer with the band in question due to obviously the passing of Tall Paul.
Well, Dark Arena, I'm actually I'm into Dark Arena.
Okay.
Okay. In simple words, I was never been out of Dark Arena. Tall Paul did a lot of stuff while I was doing a lot of stuff. So there wasn't always a Dark Arena. Dark Arena was just, he was using as a name to put out music at one point.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And whereas I was in a bunch of other bands, and we come back together, and that's when we came back together and reformed the band as Dark Arena. But there was a span of time where there was basically just Tall Paul in a studio and releasing stuff and used the name Dark Arena.
Now, is there going to be a new record with you on it with the Dark Arena name on it? Okay, cool. Awesome.
Yes. That's another project that's just being started. What we're doing is the tracks that Paul recorded, I recorded with Paul, that wasn't included on the album. The original members of the band are now regrouping and going to complete the album.
Awesome. That rules. When can we expect that? 2022, 2023?
Yeah, 2020. It's just we're starting that back up, that project up. Like I said, I'm in the middle of doing the new Sunless album. As soon as that is completed, I begin the new Wretch album that's being demoed right now. As soon as that's done, then in between or during this time, also recording the new Lucid Dream album, which is
a lot of projects, dude.
Yeah, which is a rock opera and with a lot of singers, and it's the new album is based on World War I, and I'm the King of Prussia, the Prince of Prussia, something like that. I also did finished recording a metal play based on Faust, which is called Mephisto. And I played Henry, which is part of the Faust thing, another rock opera thing. There's also the beginnings of...
You got a lot of stuff going on, man.
Yeah, I'm also the beginnings of the next Juan Ricardo project. That album's begun. All those demos have begun recording working with Vince. And the new Attacks album, where what we're basically doing, like I was saying before, why I didn't release that album is half that album's being re-recorded, that original 86 Attacks albums, that we picked the best songs and re-recording them along with new Attack songs with original members of the band, minus the original lead guitar player.
Wow.
With two new guitar players.
Dude, and next what's going to come up, you're going to have like a whole poetry book and a whole, I don't know, like a whole paintings and everything else.
All this stuff is going on, and that don't, and I'd be failed to mention the band Beyond the Sea, which is another project coming up, which is, if you catch that name, is members of Ritual, the lead guitar player of Ritual, a new project, because Ritual's no more. And the reason why Ritual, even though we did a tour, we re-released the album a couple years ago, and did a tour over in Europe did some festivals. The reason why there isn't going to be a new Ritual album is because the drummer retired. He no longer plays. And we do not want to do Ritual without all the original members.
Sure.
So,
well, dude, I'm looking forward to all this stuff.
I know
Lastly,
too much stuff.
before I let you go, let's help promote, World of Horror, because that's what we were originally doing, and we'll
Right.
bring you back on the show here if you're, I would love to
Of
bring
course,
you back
whenever.
on and talk some more shop with you on the next project that you have coming out. But
No problem at all.
where can people find the new Dark Arena album entitled World of Horror?
What you do is go on the record shop of Pure Steel Records. Go to puresteelrecords.com. You look up in there's all that information right there on the links. So look up Pure Steel Record, the Pure Steel Records store, and of course you might, depending where you're at. I know some of the record stores might have it, but a lot of, I don't know how much of that stuff goes on that much anymore. I don't know. Everything's streaming, and being shipped out. Everything's Amazon and streaming now. So I'm sure people actually go to physical record stores. People actually do go and get records. So
well, absolutely. I mean, I just read, lastly before I let you go, to branch off of your point, I just read today that literally vinyl has like a 6-month waiting period if you want to get your records pressed. So that should tell you everything you need to know when with consumers, and people still buy a lot of records. So.
Right. They do. Vinyl there's a big thing for vinyl. People believe, especially in Europe and America too. Now there's this new resurgence of that where they believe it just sounds different. It sounds more real, sounds warm. Those the audiophiles love that sound of that record. You can't CD and stream sounds digital,
Absolutely. It's like one step closer to the original, hearing them play it in the studio or something.
Right. Exactly.
So, but Juan, I really appreciate you coming on and hanging with me. It means so much, and hopefully we can get you back on here again and help promote whatever you got coming on. So
absolutely. This has been awesome. Thank you to all the metal fans out there. I really appreciate you, and I cannot end this interview without saying that anything I do with Dark Arena, I do out of the love of my friendship and in memory of my good friend Paul Konitsia, and who's the co-founder of the band, and to remember him and for his family and everything like that, and that I just feel that just need to say that, and just because it's what it's all about, really. I want to continue his legacy, and that it's sad that he couldn't see this be doing these interviews. You know what I mean? All these, I'm doing all these interviews for people around the world. It's for him, and I just believe in it. I think it's the right thing to do. So.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to more of the, Dark Arena records. And Juan, thanks so much again for coming on. Another episode of Poppitt's Corner, guys. I'm out. Cheers.